Hello and welcome to my channel. Today we will talk about Robert Browning and two of his poems, that is Last Ride Together and Grammarian Funeral. So let us start the video with one of Browning's most famous quote. So I quote, old along with me, the best is yet to be." Browning takes to be a great poet of Victorian and forerunner of the modern age. He wrote poems that are partly lyrical and partly dramatic, called the dramatic monologues. Browning used dramatic monologue to explore other man's character, whereas before him, monologues were used to express the poet's thoughts and feelings. Browning is regarded as the most accomplished writer of the dramatic monologue. So you must be wondering, what is dramatic monologue exactly? So dramatic monologue is a lyrical poem uttered by a single speaker at a critical moment of his life, but he is not the poet himself. Browning's early poetry were influenced by Shelley and some other romantic poets. Browning is said to be a master in using dramatic irony, in which the audience or the reader is aware of something which the speaker is not. His love for grotesque makes him unique. He always explores uncommon psychological behaviors. Most of his protagonists are psychopaths, and he presents death as a factor that frames our life choices. In a letter to a friend, Browning wrote, "My stress lay on incidents in the development of the soul. In the age of pessimism, he is full of optimism. He spreads the message of spiritual development. Through his poems, he gives a strong message that the triumph of the individual will wins over all obstacles. His is the voice declaring confidently to the world, 'I can and I will.' His poetry has rhythm, a strong, regular, repeated pattern of sounds or movements, but it lacks in melody of his verses. He is conversational in tone." Browning is a gifted poetic craftsman. He is matchless in writing dramatic monologues. His artistic principle is that a poet should under no circumstances sacrifice his sense to sound. He uses highly condensed and abbreviated style, which often leads to incomprehensibility. His dramatic monologues are often comparable to a soliloquy as we understand it today. According to Murphin, dramatic monologue is a lyric poem in which the speaker addresses a silent listener at a dramatic movement in the speaker's life. Browning, whose monologues were considered to be too emotional by his contemporaries, have three requirements according to Landau. The first, the reader takes the part of the silent listeners. Second, the speaker uses a case-making argumentative tone. The third, the dramatic scene is completed from within by means of inference and imagination. Typical Browning monologue. In a typical Browning monologue, the speaker is an eloquent rhetorician whose dramatic situation itself is obviously only created by the presence of the other. To conclude, we can say that dramatic monologue is a powerful form of poetry with potential to be persuasive. Psychological implications and dramatic elements make it a fascinating reading. G.K. Chesterton considered Browning the greatest of the love poets. Stafford Brooke points out that to Browning, love is the conqueror and love is God. So now let us take one of his poems, that is Grammarian Funeral, and discuss it as a dramatic monologue. So, Grammarian Funeral is among the better known poems of Robert Browning. It was first published in volume of poems Man and Woman, 1855. The basic dilemma of the poem is whether it is better to live one's life or to understand one's life. It is a classic literary it uses a classic literary theme that the two cannot be simultaneously chosen. Experiencing a moment is different than contemplating a moment. It is an eulogy. The setting of the poem is in Renaissance period. It was written shortly after the revival of learning in Europe. It is a dramatic monologue as the disciple speaks about the life of the grammarian and praises him in loved words while nobody responds to him. The grammarian is shown as a paragon of Renaissance who preferred knowledge in place of everything else. The grammarian decided he needed to understand life before he lived, so he locked himself away and devoted his life solely to his grammar. Days passed and he fell into ill health, and gradually he died. So, in the start of the poem, we can see his disciples are carrying his dead body for funeral. His disciples apparently applaud the choice as novel. Browning was in favor of balanced approach towards life. He believed life should also be enjoyed. Browning established a link between the theme of the poem and the subject of Renaissance. Certainly, Browning uses dramatic irony to suggest grammarian choose poorly in dedicating life to study over living. The triumphant tone that the speaker uses makes humorous the descriptions of the grammarian's afflictions. He talks about how he grew bold to eyes like lead, how Teuces afflicted and how life was cramped and diminished. The speaker's tone is less forwardly argumentative because it is an eulogy by a scholar student. The listener is to sympathize and respect greatness of his teacher. He wants the listener to know the attributes of the listener. The attention of the listener is drawn from the beginning. Let us begin and carry up the course. Grammarian is to be commended as a great man, if not a prudent one, because of his ambition, as the speaker says, I quote, that low man seeks a little thing to do, sees it and does it. This high man with a great thing to pursue dies ere he knows it. Line 113 to 116. Regardless of his quest, he could actually completed. Grammarian pursued the goal because he believed in understanding his grammar, he could understand the world. So now let us take another poem of the great writer or the great poet Robert Browning and discuss Last Ride Together as a dramatic monologue as well. So, dramatic monologue which states the philosophy of Robert Browning combined with the dramatic situation. Last Ride Together is combined with the dramatic situation, emotion of love and philosophy of life. In carefully patterned 10 parts, he has shown his positive approach to life, full of confidence and ability to convince the most skeptic people. He is optimistic and is clear about his achievements. The story to tell, told not as a pure lyric but form of dramatic monologue. The speaker, even in face of greatest debacle, his life rejection in love after a protected courtship, takes the joy of triumph out of very defeat, simply by glorifying happiness in in a last ride with his mistress. In the opening lines, we can see the hesitant, subdued voice due to the rejection. But once the prayer of his last rite is granted, he becomes ecstatic. I quote, "The blood replenished me again." He becomes more than a man in partial success. I quote, "So one day more am I defied." The suspense continues. The speaker concentrates profoundly bliss in the movement when his beloved embraces him wholeheartedly, and purity and intensity of love is enough to make him feel that, I quote, "flesh must fade for heaven was here." The tenderness and depth of lovers fading perfectly paralleled by tenderness and magnificent of nature. I quote, "Hush, if you saw some western cloud, all billowy bosomed overboard by many benedictions, suns and moons and evening stars at once." The major part of the poetic composition are devoted to philosophical assessment of success and failure from an unusual point of view. At the same time, it is practical and highly idealistic in his observation. He knows he has failed by the standards of the world, and that beloved's decision cannot be reversed. But like a supreme optimist, he would make the most of the consolation prize of a last ride together. Dwelling on the general failure of men of all spheres and the smallness of their actual achievement compared to their big aims, the lover consoles himself. I quote, "We ride, and I see her bosom heaven." By giving example of the achievements and failure of a poet, sculptor, and musician, he lent a dramatic flavor to the philosophic speculation. His positive optimism is seen through the closing lines of the poem, where he wishes the journey never end and hoping to reach the sublimity of heaven. I quote, "And heaven just prove that I and she ride together forever ride." He is not afraid of sufferings and hardships of life, repeated frustrations, loss of youth, feebleness of old age, and terror of death. The optimistic philosophy of his life are based on three pillars: unquestioning faith in God, who gives justice to man according to the nobility of intentions and sincerity of his endeavors, immortality of the human soul and its continuance in higher life after death, immortality of the true love, and hence absence of fear of death. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked it and it helps you. Like, share, and subscribe with your friend, and stay tuned for more such videos.